Well, believe it or not, like it or not, the holiday season is upon us once again. And I know for some of you are thinking, didn't we just get through with the holidays? And it seems like the older that we get, it really is true. It seems to come faster and faster and faster. And there's a scientific reason for why, as the older we get, we experience time faster. But I'm not going to bore you with that, but it's intriguing. It's awesome. We'll talk about it another day. But the older you get, the faster you experience time. So it seems like the holidays just ended. And guess what? Here we are talking about the holidays that are upon us once again, because Thanksgiving's just a few weeks away, and then on the heels of Thanksgiving, like here comes Christmas, here comes Christmas, here comes Christmas, and then before you know it, we're gonna, start talking about where did the holidays go? Right now we're talking about we can't believe it's Christmas already, and then before you know it, we're gonna be talking about it's Christmas and it's gone. It's gone. Where did it go? And so that's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of weeks in this series that we're called Holiday Preppers. Because like I said, believe it or not, the holidays are here again. And for some of you, depending on your family of origin, depending on your personality and a host of other variables, when you think about the holidays, you truly think about the most wonderful time of the year. I mean, you love it. You love the fall colors. You love the food at Thanksgiving. You love football. You love kind of having some chill time. You just love all of that. You love the autumn decorations. You love the candles that smell like fall. You just get into all that. And you love Christmas. You love putting up the tree. You love all the Christmas songs. You love the Christmas movies. You love Countdown to Christmas on Hallmark with Candace Cameron Bure. You just love that, and you can't get enough of it. It's just awesome and wonderful, and you really do. You think of it as the most wonderful time of the year. You love the hustle. You love the bustle. You love the shopping. You just love it all. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Then there's another half of you, statistically speaking, that when you think of the holidays, you think of the most stressful time of the year. And you think about the hustle and bustle, and you think about all the obligations, you think about all the money, and you think about all the gifts, and you think about all those people that you have to buy gifts for that you don't want to buy gifts for, but they always buy you a gift, and you just hate them buying you a gift without you buying them a gift back, and it just chaps you in the worst way to have to go buy somebody a gift that you don't want to buy a gift, and you're already thinking about that, and it's stressful, and then you finish all of your shopping, and you think you're all done, and then some Joe comes up and says, hey, I got you a gift. Why? And then it just upsets your entire holiday because you got to run out and buy Joe a gift. Oh, Joe, I've got you a gift too. I've just, you can't tell him you haven't bought it yet, but I don't have it with me, so I'll get it to you like after the holidays are over or something, right? I mean, and you just think of the most stressful time of the year because for some of you, it is. For many of you, matter of fact, statistically, they tell us now that 45% of people say they would just rather skip the holidays, not because they don't like the holidays or what the holidays are supposed to be about, but because of the stress of the holidays. Because you sit down and you try to think about getting the family together, but you can't get all the family together at one time because not all the family likes each other and not all the family, can get along with each other. So you've got to decide, when can we get together with them? When can we get together with them? And we got to make sure that we don't spend more time here than we spend there because they will get upset and they'll get offended and then we'll have to have an awkward conversation. And then for some of you have blended families. That's emotional, it's complicated. There's biological parents and step parents and step grandparents and biological grandparents and who goes where and who gets how much time. And is it a half a day on Thanksgiving? Is it, Christmas Eve here, Christmas Day there? And there's all of these things about, what do we do? And already when you think about it, it's the most stressful time of the year. And I get that. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago and I really didn't realize it, but in our family, we had never had a divorce. We never had a divorce until last year. And so last year was the first year that we had to approach the holiday through the perspective of a blended family and from a family that had experienced a divorce. And so we had to figure out, well, can they come then and can they come? And so it's really extremely, just stressful for lots of different reasons. And for many of you, 45% of you perhaps, when you think of the holidays, you think of the most stressful time of the year. But maybe for some hybrid of many of us, when we think about the holidays, we think about the most wonderful, stressful time of the year. It's like, yes, It is. It's all of those things. It's terrible. It's wonderful. It's inescapable. You know, we can't avoid it. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. And even if you're not a holiday person, you get caught up in it because your wife loves it, or your husband loves it, or your family loves it. And if you love it, you just get swept away with it anyway. It's the most wonderful, stressful time of the year. But here's what I've noticed. This is what I've noticed in my own life. This is what I've noticed in talking to friends and hearing from so many of you and just listening to what's going on in our culture. So many of us finish the holiday season with the inevitable conversation that we have with either ourselves or with those closest to us. And we'll say something like this: I think next year we should just do it entirely different. Right? Next year I think we should start doing this, and next year I think we should stop doing that. Next year I think we should do more of this and less of that, because we go through the season that's supposedly all about gratitude, peace, and joy. But by the end of it, when we're really honest with ourselves, we didn't feel a lot of gratitude, we didn't feel a whole lot of peace, and we didn't feel a whole lot of joy. But we want to. We just want to. And many of us, what we've done is we have settled for so less than what we have to settle for. And we will actually pretend. We actually slip into a part through the holidays. And we try to embody peace. And we try to embody joy, and we try to embody gratitude. But deep down inside, we know that there's something that's just not right. There's something that seems to be missing. And we ask this question: could it be different? Because somewhere inside, intuitively, we think it should be different. We think that there should be something different about the way that we keep spending holiday after holiday after holiday after holiday. And we go through and we watch the kids open all the gifts that the parents and the grandparents have given them. And inevitably, we look at all that pile of stuff. And if you got little bitty kids, you've experienced this. It's not all the pricey gifts that they received that ends up winning Christmas. It's the little $5 man, the little $5 car, or the cardboard box that the man or the car came in. And you're looking at all that stuff, and you kind of look at each other as a husband and wife, and you look at the family, it's like, and we know it ends up being like this every year, but for some reason, we just keep having this conversation about what if it could be different. And I want to say, what if it could be different? Instead of inevitably getting frustrated with family and friends and saying something we shouldn't, and somebody gets upset and somebody gets offended and somebody leaves or somebody doesn't come, and what if it could be different? What if this year the holidays could become, listen to this, holy days? What if it could become something truly significant and special? What if it could be days and a season marked by gratitude, peace, and joy? What if it could be different? Because I think all of us inside feel like it should be different. We think about the wasted money and we think about the wasted energy, and we wonder at the end of it, where did it all go? And at the end, instead of feeling full, many times we just end up feeling empty. Now, we don't say that because we don't want to spoil anybody else's Christmas. We don't want to spoil anybody else's Thanksgiving. But deep down inside, we played the part, and everybody thought we had a great time. We smiled, we laughed, and we thanked everybody for the gifts, and we said, oh, we love it, it's awesome, it's great. But somehow after the end, we just felt cheated. And we feel like we just missed something. And we wonder if it's us, or maybe it's a little bit of all of us. So now let me say this, just for those of you who aren't holiday people and you don't even want to talk about the holidays. This series is just not about how to make the most of this season. This series is going to be about how to make the most out of every season. But this is the season that we're in right now. So if you're not a holiday person, don't worry. We're going to talk about some things that not only apply to this season, but to every season of life, about how to make this season and every season better than what it has been. Because what if there was one thing? What if there was one thing that you could add to your life and I could add to my life that could totally, strategically, dramatically reinvent the holiday season or reinvent the seasons that come afterward? What if it could dramatically and significantly reinvent every season of our life just by adding one thing to our life? What if it could change the quality and the direction of this season and every other season? And I think there is. I think there's one thing. I think there's one thing that we could add to our lives that would dramatically and significantly reinvent this season and every other season. And it's called margin. Margin. Now, when we're talking about margin, here's what we're talking about. Margin is the space between your load and your limit. Everybody's got a load that they're carrying, and everybody has a limit to the load that they can carry. Everybody has a load that they're carrying, and everybody has a limit to the load that they are carrying. And so there's such a thing called margin. Margin is the space between the load that you have, the responsibility that you have, and the limits that you have. Because here's news for you, good or bad. We all have limits. There's a limit to our money. There's a limit to our resources. There's a limit to our health. There's a limit to everything. We all have a load. We all have a limit. And we all, if we add margin back into the season, into every season, it can dramatically and significantly change the way we experience the season. Because margin is such an incredibly important thing. Because listen, the less margin that you have in your life between your load and your limit, because some of you are carrying your load right up to the limit, and some of you are flirting with moving past your limit. And the less margin that you have, the more frustration that you have. Your level of irritation goes up. Your fatigue goes up. Your anxiety goes up. Your stress goes up. The tension in your relationships go up. The less margin that you have, the more of what you don't want in your life you have in your life. The less margin you have in your life, the more of what you don't want in your life you have in your life. Now, we live in an unprecedented age. And because of it, we have unprecedented problems. Now, there's nothing new under the sun. I get that. Every generation has its own problems, its own stress, its own anxiety. But we live in an unprecedented time in history. And it's a bit unique, the world and culture that we live in, because think of it. We've got all of these modern comforts and conveniences. But instead of getting more margin, we've got less margin. We've got all of these things that are supposed to help us do the things we have to do quicker and easier. We no longer have to go outside and get water and sit there and wash our clothes. We have washing machines that do that for us. We have machines that dry them so we don't have to hang them and take them down. We have machines that wash our dishes for us. We have vacuum cleaners, that suck up the dust. We've got, information at our fingertips. We've got cars that can get us places further and faster. We've got all of this stuff that's supposedly supposed to help us do things faster and easier. But what has happened in our culture? We have less and less margin when it just doesn't make sense. We've got more material but less contentment. We've got more resources to do more things, but yet we have less contentment. We have a problem with margin because we don't understand that we should have space in between our load and our limits. And some of you, the reason you're so frustrated and the reason that you're so tired and the reason that you feel the way you do, so anxious and stressed out, is because you've not yet implemented margin into your life. You've got a load and you've got a limit and you are flirting with the line. And you wonder why in the holidays you end up looking back on them saying, where did it go? I don't feel like anything significant happened. And one day you're just not going to look back on a season. You're going to look back on a life and feel that way. So let's talk about margin. And let's talk about what I think may be the biggest area where we all need margin. Just not this season, but in every season. Margin with our time. Everybody say time. If you have to drive illegally to most places to get there on time, you may need margin in your time. Ladies, if you consistently put makeup on while you drive, you may need margin in your time. Gentlemen, if you're constantly responding to email while you drive, you may need margin with your time. If every Sunday when you go to church, she's upset with you and you're upset with her and the kids are crying because everybody wanted to get here on time, but you never get here on time. And you walk in and you put a smile on your face, but you're so ticked off at her, you can't even stand how she sings. Matter of fact, you're thinking, you're so godly, you shouldn't even be singing to him. He's not even listening to you, right? All that. If that's the way you have to live life constantly, continually, consistently, and the stress level and the anxiety, all that, if that's there every single day or most days of your life, you may need margin. with your time. If you feel like you have one more thing to do, or you have one more extracurricular activity gets added to the plate, you feel like you're going to drop all the plates that you're currently spinning. You may need margin with your time. Now, you may say, well, this is just not spiritual at all. I don't feel like, this is just Christian. This is absolutely spiritual because your time is your life. And God very much cares about how you live your life, so God very much cares about how you spend your time. As a matter of fact, this idea of margin, it is not a human idea. It's actually an idea that God gave to his people. God had a group of people, the Israelites. They were slaves. And then they were, redeemed out of slavery. And God gave them a law to govern themselves by, right? He gave them lots of laws, but we're most familiar with the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, all of those things. But in the midst of the top 10, God made it so visible and so centerpiece to all the culture of Israel that they were to govern their lives around this idea of margin because God introduced to them the idea of the Sabbath. The Sabbath. God would look at the nation and say, hey, you were a group of slaves in Egypt, right? Now, this idea of taking a break, because the Sabbath said, hey, you work 6 days and then you take a day off. You work 6 days and you take a week off. This was foreign. Nobody had ever thought about anything like this. They had been slaves for 400 plus years. They didn't get days off. They didn't get holidays. They didn't get a long weekend. They didn't get a half a day on Friday. They were slaves. They worked every single day. Their load and their limit were one. Then God introduces a law and says, listen, as you govern yourselves, one of the most important things that I want to be a part of your rhyme and reason to the way you live this season and every season is I want margin building. I want you to learn how to take a Sabbath. I want you to learn how to rest. I want you to work 6 days and take a day off. Now, for those of us who are Americans, we're so accustomed to a 2-day weekend. I mean, we think everybody's always done a 2-day weekend, but that's not the case. God modeled this for all the world when he created the world in 6 days and he took a day off. And then he introduced it to his people and said, listen, it's a bit risky because in those days, it was hand to mouth. You worked to live. Right? There was no refrigeration, so you couldn't get enough food and stick it in the refrigerator. No, you went out, you got your food, and then you ate it. But God said, listen, I want you to work 6 days and then take a day off. And that was a bit risky. It may have even felt a bit dangerous. And here's what God was saying. I want you to trust me enough to rest. I want you to trust me enough to do nothing. Because in our culture, we feel like a little bit, this is a guy thing, we feel like our manhood, is determined by how much we got going on. And so, we're even embarrassed to say, hey, I got 8 hours sleep. I slept 3. I only need 3. Right? I mean, we just think the more that we can cram in, the more that we can cram in. But God said, listen, I want you to trust me enough to do nothing. I want you to trust me enough that you believe that you can do more by doing less. I want you to trust me enough to believe that you can get more done by doing less. And it requires faith and it requires trust. And God built that in to the laws that govern his people. And then Jesus would come around later on in the New Testament and he would say this, that man was not created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was created for man. Because God wanted us to teach us how to get a rhythm in life. Just not in this season, but every season. To learn how to build in margin. That we have a load to carry. There's a limit to the amount of load that we can carry. There's a limit to our money. There's a limit to our health. There's a limit to it all. And to be able to have margin built in. And the reason that God did this is because God cares what we do with our time. Because God cares what we do with our life. Our time is our life. And if God cares about what we do with our lives, and we would all agree with that, we also have to understand that God cares about what I do with my time. God cares about what I do with my minutes, my hours, my days, my weeks, my months, and ultimately my years, because eventually that will become my life. Now, if anybody understood this principle, it was Moses. Moses, who led the nation of Israel out of Egypt, parted the whole Red Sea thing. It was Moses who understood time maybe better than anybody else in this principle that God cares what we do with our time because eventually God cares what we do with our lives. So the first part of Moses' life, you remember this, maybe you saw the movie. He was a prince in Egypt. He was raised, even though he's a Hebrew, he was raised as an Egyptian. And in Egypt, he learned how to talk like an Egyptian. He learned how to walk like an Egyptian, See what I did there? Okay. Moving on. And then he killed an Egyptian, and then he fled to the backside of the desert, and then he got a job as a shepherd. He got married, and so he tended his father-in-law's sheep, Jethro, for 40 years. Now think about that. 40 years. Mundane, predictable, day in and day out experience. Tend the sheep, married, sun up, sun down, tending sheep, married. All of these things for 40 years. Then at the end of that 40 years, God shows up and says, hey, I want you to go to Egypt, deliver my people. That's what Moses did, and then he led them out of Egypt. And then a couple weeks ago, we talked about this. They were going to go into the promised land, but because of their faithlessness, God said, no, I'm not going to let you go in. You're going to have to wander the wilderness for 40 years. So the next 40 years of Moses' life, he basically led and pastored a group of people while he waited for an entire generation to die. How would you like that job? Moses, so-and-so died. Shock. They want you to do the funeral. Shock. Moses only needed one sermon. He probably had to do it multiple times a day. And every time the nation of Israel moved from place to place, they left behind a cemetery. Because for 40 years, he waited for a generation to die. And then when it came time to go into the promised land, God said, I'm not going to let you go in the promised land, but go up on top of the mountain, look over. He did. Then God let Moses die. But before Moses died, this man who understood time perhaps better than anybody else because he'd had different seasons of life, and as he reflected on those seasons of life, he drew conclusions and he gained wisdom. And before he died somewhere, Moses wrote about time. Now, scholars tell us that the oldest part of our Old Testament scriptures is the book of Job, but the second oldest part of the Old Testament scriptures is a psalm. One particular psalm that most people believe was written by Moses. And when Moses wrote this psalm, he was writing about how that we should see time, how that we should view time, our perspective. And so what Moses is going to do, Moses is going to give all of us a gift. He's going to give all of us a gift that's going to help us to create margin in this season and in every other season of our life, and we'll never see time quite the same way. So here's what Moses said. He said, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout the generations. And so he's writing creatively, and he's speaking in terms to remind us that God exists outside of time. Now, I'm not going to bore you, but this is so interesting, it would just cause our eyes to cross. God created time. God is the author of time, mass, and space. But God exists outside of time, mass, and space. God is spirit, God is timeless, God is infinite. God created the finite universe, and God exists outside of it. And so when Moses thinks about time, he thinks about it in the context that God created time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God created the time-space continuum. God created all the mass that is in the universe. But yet Moses said, God, I realize that you exist outside of time. And that everything around me is dying, everything around me is passing away, but God, the one constant that never changes is you. Seasons change, but you don't change. Fashions change, but God, you don't change. Politics change, but God, you don't change. People come and people go, but God, you don't change. Elections come and elections go, but God, you don't change. You are the one constant, God. You exist outside of time. You are the author of time. And then he goes on, he says, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. This is incredible. Moses is giving us a perspective about how to view time and how to view our lives. And ultimately, he says, God, you are the bookends. You are the bookends of life. You are infinite. And the best way I know how to say it, God, you are from everlasting to everlasting. Everything else is finite and passing away. But God, you supersede it all. And ultimately what he's saying is this: God, I realize that I'm not the point. Moses' point is, you're not the point of your life. Moses' point is, I'm not the point of my life. I'm just a snippet. I am just a snap in the story that's being told from everlasting to everlasting. That the point is God. The point is the one constant, the one infinite, timeless, immaterial God who is above all and greater than all. God, I'm just a part of this story that you are telling. God, you are the point. And so he's given us perspective. And then he goes a little bit further and he says, you turn people back to dust. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But here's the thing, if you're a Jesus follower, you believe that you're going to die one day, and that's reality. So this is so depressing. No, this is reality. But here's what happens. We don't like to think about reality because a lot of times we don't allow our faith to take us to the truest part of reality. We don't like to think about dying. Well, that's reality. 10 out of 10, latest statistics, 10 out of 10 die, okay? You can't escape it. We believe as Jesus followers, we're going to die and go to dust, but we believe because Jesus came, died, was buried, and rose again, we believe one day when he comes back, we're going to come from dust. We're going to be resurrected. So this is not depressing. This is just reality. He says, return to dust, you mortals. And then this is incredible. Listen to this. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Moses says, God, your perspective of time, 1,000 years to you, God, must be like a day. And then he thinks about it. He says, no. God, 1,000 years to you must be like a watch in the night. And a watch was 3 hours. Now, think about this. This is incredible. Moses says, God, from your perspective, 1,000 years of history, 1,000 years of time is like 3 hours to you. If that's true, what must our lifetime be like from the perspective of God? Whew. Just a moment, just a snap, just a blink. And Moses' point is this, that if our life in the large scheme, the large storyline of what God is telling, if our lives are just a vapor, here today and gone tomorrow, that if our lifespan, whatever that lifespan may be, that it's just a moment from the perspective of God, how much should we care about how we spend our little snippet of time in this life? He says, you sweep people, he goes on, you sweep people away into the sleep of death. And then he says, it's just the brevity of life. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. And I know what you're thinking. When I heard holiday preppers, this is not what I was thinking. But again, we're going to learn something, and we're going to come out of this. It's going to get better, so stay with me. But Moses is taking us somewhere so that we can understand more about our lives and more about how we spend our time. He says, it's like grass. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. That's what it is. He goes on, he says, our days may come to 70 years. You may live to 70, you may not. There's no promise of that. You may live to 80, or you may not. There's no promise of that. If our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow. He says, we all ultimately have the same stories. Have you noticed that? We're born, we go to school, kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school, and then after high school, some of us go get a job. After high school, some of us go to college, and after college, we get a job. And then, we try to get married, and then some of us get married, and then we get unmarried, then we get married again. And some of us get married and stay married, and then we have kids, and then sometimes we have a bunch of kids. And then we work, and 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 then we retire, and then we die. You ever notice that's kind of how it happens? Except sometimes you die before you get to the retire part. Sometimes you die before you get to the kids part. Sometimes you die before you get to the married part. Sometimes you die before you get to the high school part. So there's no assurance, but he says, even if you get 70 or 80 years, he says it's all going to be the same story in the end, and then we just kind of fly away. And then he says something that makes no sense on the surface, but he says, if we only knew the power of your anger, your wrath is as great as the fear that is due. It's like, what? And Hebrew scholars basically translate this verse to say, God is saying that if you could truly see me as everlasting to everlasting, the one constant that never changes, outside of time, greater than all, it would change the way you live your life. And it would change the way you spend your time. If you saw God more clearly, you would use your time more wisely. And then Moses gives us something so important. Whether you're a believer or not a believer, this is so helpful. This is what Moses said. Moses gives us a prayer. God, teach us to number our days. That purposeful statement, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. God, teach us to understand that there is a limit to our time. Teach us to number our days, because when we understand we only have a certain amount of days, we gain wisdom. There's wisdom in that. There's wisdom in thinking about this. There's wisdom in embracing this. Teach us to number our days, because death clarifies life. Do you know who sees life more clearly than anybody else? People who know they're actively dying. They understand what's important and what's not. They see through all the stuff. They can cut through all the crud, and they can see what's truly important more clearly than anybody else, because death clarifies life. No wonder the psalmist prayed, show me, O God, my life's end. It's a scary prayer to pray, because what if he does? January 17th, 2017. What would you do? June 7th, 2024. What would you do? Show me the end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. Why? Because when we number our days, we get wisdom. We see things different. The point of what Moses is saying is this: count your days so your days will count. If you don't count your days won't count. Instead of spending time wisely, you will waste it. And in wasting time, one day you will look back and realize you wasted your life, because time is life. Now, this is just the average here in this country, right? But if you live the average life, 28,000 days. God, teach us to number our days, 28,000 days. You're born, 28,000 days. Sounds pretty good. Sounds like a lot. But then you grow older and they pass by faster and faster and faster. If you're 18, that means you have 21,170 days left. If you're 28, 17,500. If you're 36, 14,600. Sounds like a good price of a good used car, right? 14,600, that's what you got right there. If you're 40, you got 13,140. If you're 50, 9,460, 60, 5,840, 70, 2,190. God, teach us to number our days. Why? Because when you realize you have a limited amount of time, it changes the way you see time, and it changes the way that you want to spend your time. Teach us to number our days. Or in this case, teach us to number our holidays, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Because you only get so many. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you are 19 years old, you have 57 holidays left. You have 57 Christmases, Thanksgivings left. Now, if you're not a holiday person, you don't want to think about it in those terms. You have 57 more years. You have 57 more trips around the sun. It looks pretty good. You're feeling pretty good about yourself, those of you who are 19. Younger, you got more, but 19, you've got 57. God, teach us to number our days, because I realize that every year it's becoming less and less. If you're 38, I had to ask them during run-through. I was like, am I 37 or am I 38? Because at a certain point, you just don't care anymore, right? It's like, and they said, no, you're 38. So here I am. This is where I'm at in my life, 38. You know what I've got? 38 left. 38. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a brother. I'm a friend. I got 38. I got 38 years. If I'm average, I have no promise of it, but I have 38. Listen, as parents, we've got one of these in our two sons' rooms that's full of marbles. And we've got a marble in that represents every week that we'll have them until they're 18 and they move out, right? I really expected like some of you have already got them out, haven't you? You're like, bless God, it's the greatest season of our life. No mourning the empty nest here. Okay, but anyway. But it helps you. You see it. It's like, oh, I don't have an infinite amount of time. I have a limited amount of time, so I should probably think about how I spend my time. If you're 38, you have 38 more Christmas, 38 more holidays. If you're 57, you got 19 left. You're not feeling so good right now. I understand, but stay with me. If you're 76, you owe God some Christmases. You owe him borrowed time. Do you know what that means? Forget about that diet this year. Eat all you want, brother and sister. Eat it all. Give. Because you have no promise of tomorrow. You're welcome. Moses says, this is serious, but if you will number your days, you'll get wisdom. You'll get wisdom. There's wisdom in understanding that there is a limit. And when you understand that there's a limit, you will want to create margin. Because the less margin you have, the more frustration, irritation, fatigue, anxiety, stress, resentment, regret. The less margin you have, the more of what you don't want in your life you end up having. So what do? I want to give you some of the most practical things that I can give you. I want to give you something that you can take home today with your family. This is just not for this season, but this is for every season. I'm going to give you 3 things that can really begin to help you have wisdom. God, teach me to number my days that I may have a heart of wisdom. And the first thing is that in response to this, you just need to prioritize. You need to sit down and you need to prioritize. And you need to ask this question. Here's the question you need to ask. Ask it with your wife, your family, your kids. What are the most important things in my life, our life, really? Really? There's God, there's family, there's faith, there's friends. What are the most important things really? Because sometimes our life is filled with the things that aren't most important. And we got so much less important things that it has edged the most important thing out. Teach us to number our days that we may prioritize. Because the principle is, when you prioritize the right things today, you won't regret the wrong things tomorrow. If you never sit down and prioritize and understand what's most important, one day you'll regret it because you will have spent your life and your time for the things that did not matter most. Second thing, you prioritize, and then you analyze. You take a look. This is how we spend our time. This is how we spend our holidays. This is how we spend our seasons. This is how we spend our time. Whatever context you want to put it in. You say, this is what it looks like. And ask these questions. What do I need to start doing? Based on what my priorities are. Maybe it's start a devotion time in the morning. Maybe it's getting up a little early and having a prayer time. What do I need to start doing? Maybe I need to carve some time and have a date night. Maybe I need to carve some time and have a family night. Maybe I need to carve some time and have a dinner around the table. Maybe I need to start making some room for the friends that are closest to me. Instead of trying to give 100 people a little bit of time, maybe I should give those closest to me the best of my time. What do I need to start doing? Because there's some things that you need to start doing. There's some things I need to start. What do I need to stop doing? Because there's some things I need to stop doing. That second hobby, sitting on my phone, just checking things out, Netflix binge, whatever you want to do. What do I need to stop doing? What do I need to do more of? What do I need to do less of? And be honest about it. Because the principle is this. Since our time is limited, we should limit what we do with our time. Because how we spend our time will one day be how we lived our lives. So you should take a look at it. And then you should organize. You should organize. Organize around your priorities. Organize around the answers to those questions about what do I need to start doing, stop doing, do more of, do less of. And then ask this question, parents especially, of young kids and teenage kids. Do I want my time decisions made by fear and guilt or by faith and gratitude? So many of our time decisions are made by fear of what if my kids get mad at me? What if they're not involved in everything else that everybody else is involved in, and I feel guilty that, they're not involved in that and some of their friends are involved in that. Seriously, it's so easy. Now, I understand this now that I'm a parent. It's so easy to make decisions based on fear and guilt with what we do with our time. Fear of what other people think, fear of what other people will say, and guilt that we're not doing as much for our family and for everybody else and we're not involved. Would you really want your time and your decisions about time to be driven by fear and guilt or by faith and by gratitude for what God has put in your life about what's most important in your life? Which one would you rather do? And then the principle is this: having margin will cost me something, and having no margin will cost me something. One is worth it, the other isn't. If you live life with margin, it will cost you something. You're going to have to make some tough decisions. You're going to have to pull back. You're going to have to stop. You're going to have to start. You're going to have to go back and redo and punt. You're going to have a family conference and explain it to the kids, and the kids are going to pout, and the kids are going to cry, and they're going to make you feel bad, and they're going to make you feel guilty. But you are the parent. You understand that, right? They call you mom and dad for a reason. You're the mom. You're the dad. You're an adult. Their brains aren't fully formed. It's true. So God's called you to lead. So you may have to do that, but that's okay. That's what you're supposed to do. But if you live life with no margin, it'll cost you, and it may cost you what you don't want to pay. It may cost you your kids. It may cost you family. It may cost you marriage. It may cost you health. And the point, you can't make more time, but you can make the most of your time. Can't make more time, but you can make the most of your time. So what do you need to do with your time to create margin? To trust God enough to rest this season. In our family, we did a couple of things a couple of years ago that was real difficult. And we called my family and we told them, because used to we'd come to church here on Christmas Eve, and then we would drive an hour and 20 minutes and spend about an hour and a half with my family. Then we'd drive back up and try to be with Allison's family. And then, everybody's tired and we're trying to get the kids up on Christmas Day, and then we're trying to go here and there. And we just told my family, we're not coming there on Christmas Eve anymore because it's too much. And nobody enjoys it at the end of it anyway. Let us come 2 days earlier, and we'll spend more time, and it'll be better. And we did. They didn't make us feel guilty as their children. And that's what we did. And it was better for everybody. We cleared our calendar so we could be here at church on Christmas Eve because that's what we wanted for our family. Christmas Eve, I don't have any obligations after church. I can go home if I want. I don't have to if I don't want to. Christmas morning and Christmas Day belongs to my family. We can sit around in pajamas all day and eat cookies and drink milk, whatever we want to do. And then Christmas night, we've got a plan. But we create a margin, and it's much better. You got to have a conversation. Sometimes it's not always easy, but it ends up being better. And you got to figure out what this means for you, your family, this season, and every other season, because you can't make more time, but you can make the most of your time. Let me pray for us. Father, teach us to number our days, that we may have a heart of wisdom. Teach us to trust you enough to create margin in our lives. Trust us enough to rest. Trust us enough to do less, believing that we may actually get more done. So God, give us this wisdom that can only come through numbering our days, because our days, our time is ultimately our life. And God, you care about how we spend our lives. So God, help us to care about how we manage our time. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.